Welcome to Football Conspiracies.
I'm Jared Rabinovich.
And I'm Jared Cole.
This week's episode, The First Conspiracy.
Okay, so Jared, how familiar are you with football in the early 20th century?
Not terribly familiar. I know, as a history buff, a little bit about the origins of the sport, a little bit about how Teddy Roosevelt helped make it a bigger sport in the country, but not too much, honestly.
So I'm going to introduce you to the very first conspiracy in professional football history.
Okay, I'm real excited for this one.
This story has some god-tier hating, a massive misinformation campaign, and almost spelt the end for professional football in Ohio.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's quite the hook you got for me.
So this whole conspiracy surrounds the Canton Bulldogs and the Massillon Tigers and a betting scandal.
Mm-hmm.
A series of allegations made by a Massillon, Ohio newspaper claiming that Canton Bulldogs coach Blondie Wallace and Massillon Tigers end Walter East of conspiring to fix the two-game series between the two clubs.
Okay, what year was this in?
This is in 1906.
Okay, this is early days.
Yes.
They didn't even know how to play football at this point. I know one story that I'll definitely touch on in a later episode of two football teams, high school teams that came together and they were playing a different game. There was no established rules of this game yet.
We're gonna get into just how early days it is, okay? But just for the viewer to understand what this series of allegations were, on one account, the scandal called for Canton to win the first game, Massillon to win the second game, forcing a third game that would be played as the 1906 Ohio League Championship.
So, was this some conspiracy to keep it going, try to get more games out of it?
So this first part of the conspiracy, or the first allegation of this conspiracy, was just Team 1 wins the first game, Team 2 wins the second game, forcing the championship to be Game 3.
Okay, and this was in order, this was bet padding. People were trying to make money off of this.
Yes.
Okay, understood.
Another account of the scandal accused Blondie Wallace, the coach, and Walter East, the end, of bribing Massillon players to throw a game in the series.
Okay.
So Canton denied the charges on Blondie's account, saying that Massillon only wanted to damage the team's reputation. So now we're going to get into a little bit of history behind this whole conspiracy, see how things came to be how they were.
Sounds good.
So we're going to start off with the beginning of the rivalry. We're going all the way to 1905 here. So the two teams we're talking about, the Canton Bulldogs and the Massillon Tigers, were probably the two best teams in the country. First of all, there weren't a lot of pro teams, so it wasn't very hard to be considered one of the best teams in the country. But it was crazy that these teams were only located 15 miles apart.
Okay, so both small towns in Ohio, I guess.
Both small towns in Ohio with great football teams.
For sure.
For the time. Canton was called the Canton Athletic Club in 1905 and was formed for the sole purpose of beating the Tigers, who had won the Ohio League Championship since 1903.
Wait, what do you mean the sole purpose?
The sole purpose, the Canton Athletic Club forming a football team, was to beat the Tigers because the Tigers had won the championship every single year.
So a grassroots campaign started out of Canton of people who were just pissed off the Tigers kept winning?
No. It was an actual athletic club. They had backers and all that stuff, and people were paying for the team to be formed, but they wanted their own team to win. They didn't want Massillon to win another championship.
So the whole point of this was
the origins of the team are solely to win the championship and solely to beat Massillon.
So the backers who came, the people who are paying money, all the athletes, their mission is just to beat this team.
Yes.
Understood. That's badass. Love it.
So both teams spent a huge amount of money for the time to bring in ringers from out of town.
Mm-hmm.
The first Canton-Massillon game was played on November 30th, 1905. The game was a season finale for both clubs. Up until that final game, Massillon had posted an 8-0 record, while Canton posted an 8-1 record. Massillon went on to win the game 14-4. The victory brought the Tigers the Ohio League Championship for the third consecutive year.
Of course it did.
I also have a little picture for you here of what the headline looked like for the very first game, and a little drawing that some artist did for a newspaper back in 1905.
Oh my god, this is early 1900s newspaper core. It says the Canton Bulldog and the Massillon Tiger will soon be face to face, and there's these
drawings.
Ugly drawings, satirical looking drawings of a terribly looking bulldog next to a fiercer looking tiger, I would say, but damn, these guys are both unkempt at best.
Yeah, no. It's just funny to see a 1905 newspaper, if I'm going to be honest.
Oh no, 100%. They're all rags. I love it.
So, in the off-season following the championship, some financial charges started to get thrown around in some newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
So, a news story in The Plain Dealer alleged that the Canton Athletic Club was financially broke and could not pay its players for the final game of 1905. The club denied the allegations and insisted that every dollar promised had indeed been delivered. Many Canton followers believe that the story had originated in Massillon as a trick to discredit their team and make it tougher for Canton to recruit players for 1906. Massillon coach Ed Stewart also had connections to the newspaper, which even furthered people's
solidifies
belief.
That for sure.
Yeah, so major misinformation campaign going on right at the beginning. This team has just finished year one, and they're already being
maligned,
especially by the 3-time champs.
Yeah.
Imagine beating someone in the championship game, and then after that fact being you also couldn't pay your players.
It's like the Chiefs coming out right now and being the Tonawanda Cardex. Those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So, in 1905, Canton was, in fact, losing money. They weren't profitable. But they did have a large group of businessmen who backed the team and shouldered the losses. So, they were never any risk of going under. They never had any risk of not paying their players.
So this was all just, complete bullshit.
Yeah.
Confirmed they just made this up to defame the team.
Yeah, Canton was losing money, but they had their backers. The
players were paid. None of the players said anything.
None of the players said anything.
Wow, okay. Just defamation. That's crazy.
In a countercharge, Canton insisted that the Tigers were also deeply in debt.
Oh my god.
The Tigers put out a statement showing that they had $16,037.90 in receipts and only $16,015.65 in expenditures.
So they had a bank account totaling what, $1?
Their final bank account was
$12.
Basically $12, just under.
12 American dollars. Wow.
The only problem with Massillon's figures is that they only listed salaries, including railroad fare, at $6,740.95. Which means that players were getting only about $50 per game.
I can't really trash that without knowing what $50 was in 1905. I'm sure it wasn't even close to equivalent of what players get paid now, but how bad was that? I guess it's got to be put in perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to put that into a little bit of context for you. In 1892, 1892, the first player to ever become paid to play football was paid $500 in a game.
A game?
He was paid $500 for that game when he became the first player to be paid.
And that was 20 years this.
Yeah.
Or 15 years before this.
That was 15 years before this and 10 times the amount of money.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely unreasonable then. $50 is a low ball at best.
Yeah, for sure, low ball.
And for a team that's already won 2 championships in a row.
3.
Now 3, yeah.
It's also believed that, like Canton, Massillon's area boosters picked up whatever losses the Tigers incurred during the 1905 season. So all these financial claims literally were nothing because both teams had backers, both teams had money, no one was worried.
Okay, all this was meaningless. This is just them like
all meaningless.
This is just a pissing contest between the Tigers and the Bulldogs.
So the whole reason for this was kind of like a misinformation recruitment campaign. Like, you don't want to go over to Canton, you don't want to go over to Massillon, you want to come over to us.
I see.
Yeah.
Kind of like the famous Thomas Edison versus Nikola Tesla feud of the AC/DC days.
Exactly. It's it is the exact same.
Yeah, for that Venn diagram of people who know a lot about the history of electricity and football fans. That's for you guys.
So these misinformation recruitment campaigns might have actually worked. From the 1906 season, Canton's coach, Blondie Wallace, signed the entire 1905 Tigers backfield.
That's so badass. Like, I respect that move so much. That's the epitome of petty.
Yeah. Massillon's head coach, Ed Stewart, was promoted to manager, and Sherburne Whiteman was hired as the new team head coach.
Okay.
Now to get into the series. So, as I mentioned before, it was a 2-game series laid out, with the hopes that Game 3 would be the championship game.
So we already know that the outcome is that the Tigers end up winning this 3-game series.
No, they don't.
Oh, this is a totally different series we're talking about.
We're starting to get into the 1906 season.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, so in 1906, the scheduling, an earlier agreement called for both clubs would each get one home game, and each club would receive 60% of their own gate admissions and reserved seating rights. However, Massillon disliked the deal because Canton would receive more money for their games because their stadium was larger, and the game in Canton would be played in October instead of Massillon's would be played in November. So crappier weather, less fans, less seating, less fans. This led the Tigers to ask that their November game be played on Thanksgiving Day, when every football fan would attend regardless of the weather.
Not a bad plan.
However, that October, Wallace traveled to Pennsylvania to recruit some players for upcoming games against Massillon. There, he scheduled a Thanksgiving Day game against the Latrobe Athletic Association, the top team in Pennsylvania, and one of the other top squads in the country.
So they already had a scheduling conflict here. They needed to play this other team.
Yeah. Also, just of note, remember how I said earlier how the 8-0 Massillon Tigers played the 8-1 Canton Bulldogs in a championship game?
Yes.
The Latrobe Athletic Association was the team to hand Canton their loss earlier.
Oh, wow. Okay. So credible team.
So a credible team, and they now have a game scheduled on Thanksgiving Day. So Massillon and Canton agreed to play their 2 games both in November and both share 50% of the gate receipts.
Fair deal, I guess.
Yeah, they both get 50% of the profits, and they both have to play in November. So instead of Canton getting the advantage, which I don't know why they would move their game to November now. If they're splitting it 50-50, you would want October to get more people.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm not going to look too deep into that.
Anyways, the Canton home game was scheduled for November 16th. The Massillon home game was scheduled for November 24th, the weekend before Thanksgiving. However, many Tigers fans felt that the scheduling of Canton and Latrobe was only a ploy to get Massillon to agree to lesser terms. Therefore, language was added to the agreement that if Massillon did anything to disrupt the Canton-Latrobe game, they would lose all their gate money from the first game at Canton to the Bulldogs.
That's a smart form of insurance.
Yeah. The money from November 16th was held in escrow in a Canton bank. To ensure the Thanksgiving Day game between Latrobe and Canton was legitimate, the gate money from the second Bulldogs-Tigers game was also kept, this time in a bank in Massillon. If the Canton-Latrobe game never occurred, then Massillon would be entitled to all Canton's gate money from the second Canton-Massillon game. Each team was also required to put up a $3,000 bond as insurance that each team would show up on game day.
This is insane. Like, the levels of rigmarole they have to go to just to play a game of football. Imagine this being how every NFL game was organized today.
Yeah,
The Bills
crazy.
will only play if you gift us 3 cattle and an oxen.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody's even touched the field yet.
Yeah, this is insane.
This is all still the off season.
Money's being held in escrow.
Yeah, like their contracts, $3,000 insurance bonds from both teams.
And like $3,000 in 1906 was not anything to sniff at.
No, that's significant money. It's crazy what early 20th century football was.
I know, every time we dip our toes into this, it's flabbergasting. I don't know.
The first 50 years of like football as a sport rather than football as a league is just like the most insanely stupid and crazy thing.
I know how it survived through that era and turned into what we see today is forever shocking to me.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. All right. Now it's time to get into game 1 of our series between the Massillon Tigers and the Canton Bulldogs. To prepare for the series against Massillon, Blondie Wallace took his team to the campus of Penn State University to conduct drills and practices. There, he met Lions coach Tom Fennell and gave Canton, now officially the Bulldogs, special instructions on how to use the forward pass.
Wait. You can't.
I swear to God.
They're giving each other was that not always a part of football?
No. Oh, the forward pass was definitely not.
Oh wait, no, I
always a
actually
part of
knew this. There
football.
was a point where the forward pass was illegal, right?
Well, not just. It wasn't just illegal at a certain point. It's just people just didn't think to do it. They're just like, we're running the ball, we're doing well, and we can throw it backwards like lateral because they were inspired by rugby.
Yeah, they were just
never
playing
thought
rugby. They never
forward. Exactly.
What was football before it was just rugby before the forward pass, wasn't it?
I plan on doing an end segment on some of the early days because there was a controversy in the early days, not a conspiracy, that I wanted to touch on, but we'll get there one day.
Of course,
we'll get there one day. So the much anticipated first game of the series was about to start in Canton. It was the biggest football game Ohio had ever seen up until that point. The Bell Telephone Company even had manned stations all around the grounds. As fast as a play was being made, it was telegraphed to every major city in the United States.
Oh wow,
this wasn't just the biggest football game Ohio had ever seen. This is possibly the biggest football game in the country.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever at the time. The game was won by Canton at a score of 10-5.
What a boring game. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, scoring was weird back.
Yeah, like what'd they get? The Tigers got a safety and a field goal?
No, so it was actually 2 touchdowns and 1 touchdown. In 1898, a touchdown was changed from 4 points to 5 points.
Really? So at this time, the touchdown was only 5 points.
Yeah, it was 3. It was a 3 touchdown game.
Oh wow, okay, that's more entertaining than I expected.
Exactly, yeah. But Canton came out the victors, 1-0 in the series. So big games like these always brought out theories of a fix. However, Massillon's Ed Stewart stated that it would be impossible to fix the coming game, stating that an entire team, not just certain players, would have to be involved.
That's really like shooting yourself in the foot, isn't it?
So, Big Bill Edwards, a former player from Princeton, officiated the game and kept both teams in check. However, things became more heated for the second game. The Tigers vowed to defeat Canton with their same roster from November 16th, while Bell Telephone again announced it would telegraph a play-by-play account of the second game.
Wait. I never thought this through to its logical conclusion. It's Bell Telegraph. There's people sitting at like their telegraph machines or like getting delivered. I don't know how telegraph works. Like they're like getting like bit by bit updates like in like cue cards essentially.
I guess I don't know how the telegraph works, but they were getting them.
It's like getting hand delivered versions of like the play by play score updates.
that honestly, they should bring that back.
They should bring that back. Yeah,
I want a telegraph for every single Bucks game. Like,
I'll see if I can work that out for you this upcoming season.
That would be dope.
I think I have a telegraph guy.
Yeah. So the only roster change that actually occurred was when Bulldogs signed Eddie Wood, a regular end from the Latrobe Athletic Association, to play in the rematch for an injured player Meanwhile, Stewart announced that Big Bill Edwards would be unavailable to referee because he had been officiating that year's Yale-Harvard game. Edward Whiting of Cornell University, who umpired the first game at Canton, agreed to bring a replacement ref with him. Prior to the start of the game, a disagreement over which ball to use occurred.
Is this like OG Deflategate?
This is OG Deflategate. Massillon showed up with a ball several ounces lighter than the Spalding brand ball Canton was used to. Blondie Wallace protested that a ball made by Spalding was the norm. However, Massillon was adamant about keeping the lighter ball, which was provided to the Tigers by Ed Stewart.
This is crazy.
This is the OG Deflategate.
This is where Bill Belichick and Dan Tom were reading out of. This is the playbook.
Yeah, they were looking back to 1906 and seeing what Massillon was up to, and they're like, oh, we can do that today.
That's awesome.
So Wallace's protest fell on deaf ears and was told by the game's official that he could either accept the lighter ball or forfeit both the game and the $3,000 guarantee.
Wait, why did he end up siding with the lighter ball?
He had to. The officials gave him no choice.
No, but why'd the officials end up deciding with that?
Because the officials didn't see a problem.
So weird.
Yeah, it
smells of corruption.
It's 1906, Jared.
You're right. I shouldn't be asking too many questions. That's on me.
So it's unconfirmed why Massillon wanted to use the lighter ball, but unlike Brady, who wanted to use it for throwing and catching, it's believed that Massillon wanted to use it for their kicking game.
Yeah, that's what I figured, right? I mean, there's no forward pass to speak of, so...
Exactly. So the Bulldogs, coming off their 10-5 win a week ago, were favored to win the game. However, Massillon outplayed Canton and won the rematch 13-6, and was named Ohio League's champion for the 4th straight year in a row.
I'm confused about a couple things. First of all, how'd they get to 13-6?
Give me a sec. And your other question?
Why did the Tigers become the winners of the entire game if they only won one of the two games? I don't understand that. Was it like a score aggregate?
To answer your first question, so I have the box score here. Neither team scored in the first quarter. Massillon was up 5-0 going into the half.
So that's a touchdown.
At the end of the third, it was 6-7 for Massillon.
Okay.
And then Massillon scored again to make it 13-6.
All right, we'll need to do a deeper dive on how that ended up coming out at some point, but that just seems silly to me. But you know what? All of football in this era was silly to me. So
Yeah. Like I mentioned a few podcasts ago when we were talking about early days of football, it was about your record, not about a playoff sort of thing. So at the time, Massillon just had the better record going
I see. So winning this game, regardless of the record between them and the Bulldogs, meant that they won the season.
After their win, they were 9-1. The Canton Bulldogs were 9-2.
I see. Makes sense.
Yeah.
They also played one more game, but that's technicalities.
Yeah. Okay, now it's time for the conspiracy. So once the game was over, Canton's coach, Blondie Wallace, in a show of sportsmanship, joined the Massillon celebration and congratulated the Tigers on their championship. However, that evening, after the second game in a hotel bar, a brawl erupted among several of the Canton players and fans over allegations that the game had been fixed. Jack Cusack, who would become the owner and manager of the Canton Bulldogs from 1912 until 1915, wrote in his book, Pioneer in Pro Football, that the fight was started by Cusack's neighbor, Victor Kaufman, a physician who suffered heavy betting losses on the disputed contest. Cusack stated that he went with Kaufman to the Cortland Hotel bar where Kaufman loudly made allegations of a fix. A large bar fight started in the hotel and quickly spread onto the street. Police were then called to break up the disturbance. Both Cusack and Kaufman reportedly avoided arrest. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, also, if football was corrupt, so were cops in 1906.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, meanwhile, Massillon's Ed Stewart, through his newspaper connections, charged that an actual attempt had been made to bribe some of the Tigers players into throwing the game and that Blondie Wallace had been involved. One story suggested that Canton players had bet large amounts of money on themselves to win while approaching the Massillon players and asking them to throw the game in exchange for a share of those winnings. Some Canton followers then wondered if Wallace threw the game to Massillon in order to collect on some other game wagers. At first, the play calling strategy of Wallace was the focus of the suspicion, but as the scandal grew, a number of contradictory allegations came out. Nothing worth noting. Like, it's all like...
Really?
It's all like, you ran this play and it was a bad play. And it was like, yeah, well, that's kind of football. Like,
so, like, similar stuff that we saw in, like, the Super Bowl III allegations.
Yeah,
just like...
exactly. It's, like, so weak. It's like they don't like the plays that... They don't like the outcome of the play, so they assume that the play had to be fixed.
Yeah, like, if that's the case, every game of all time has been rigged in the NFL.
Exactly.
If the fans don't like the calls, yeah.
So, Canton denied the charges, maintaining that Massillon only wanted to ruin the club's reputation before their final game on Thanksgiving Day against Latrobe. So, again, Canton claiming this is another mass misinformation campaign.
Well, I mean, one was run on them just a year before. I understand why.
Canton, again, threw out a counter charge, was that the scandal was designed by the Tigers to cripple the Bulldogs financially by destroying the gate revenue for the Latrobe game. Massillon could not prove the charge. However, the stands were almost completely empty for the Thanksgiving Day game, leaving Canton unable to play their players.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's actually crazy.
Yeah, so this misinformation campaign actually kind of worked a little bit.
Was there no... I thought there was a contingency that they couldn't mess with that game.
As long as the game was played, which it was.
Oh, that was the only standard. Okay.
Yeah, there wasn't anything to stop the game from being played, so they got their money. It was more no one showed up to the game.
Wow, the lawyers for the Bulldogs on that one really didn't think through enough contingencies.
So, in 1934, a historically inaccurate book called Pro Football, Its Ups and Downs documented the early days of professional football. The book documented the scandal and was used by sports historians for the next 70 years. The author of this book was Henry March, an executive for the New York Giants from 1925 to 1936, and later an organizer of the Second American Football League. However, March also practiced medicine in Canton in 1906 and was one of the Bulldogs' team doctors.
No way.
Of the incident, March stated that Wallace persuaded an unnamed Canton player to deliberately throw the game. When accused by his teammates, this player said he simply obeyed orders. The player then quickly left town on the first available train while still in uniform. The Professional Football Researchers Association identified the player as Eddie Wood of Latrobe. March gave the impression in his book that Eddie Wood was running for his life because of angry fans and even more upset teammates.
This guy rigged the game. This guy threw the game.
However, big however,
oh
massive
my God.
however.
Man, you also have me pilled to the gills.
There's so many different things going on here, like different elements to this conspiracy that...
Okay, no, I'm listening. My ears are...
However, even before the second game began, it was announced that Wood would be on the first train back to Latrobe once the game ended. Not to mention that when Wood returned on the following Thursday with the Latrobe team, he was not attacked by the fans or an ex-Canton teammate. Also, Wood scored the Bulldogs' only touchdown of the game. As for Wallace's orders, Wood often crashed the middle of the field on defense, allowing the Tigers to escape outside. However, Massillon was historically known for running up the middle.
Wait, so, okay. Was this all just made up?
Yes.
Like, were the threats towards Wood, all of that made up?
This whole story involving Eddie Wood being the reason for this conspiracy was from Henry March's 1934 book.
This is all from that book.
Which historically is very inaccurate. Like, people like used to turn to this book to look at the early days, and now they go, what the fuck is this
Oh
shit?
yeah, millions of examples of things like that in history of just like books that were relied upon for hundreds of years to quickly realize that all of it's complete bullshit.
Exactly, and this was one of those books.
Love to find that. What a hidden gem.
Well, I have the author, I have the year, and I have the title, so
I
it shouldn't
might-
be
yeah.
too hard to find.
You're tempting me to read it. We might have an episode on this book coming up in the future.
Another layer to this conspiracy is that Massillon manager Ed Stewart never stated which Canton Massillon game was fixed. Instead, his accusation was that an attempt had been made to bribe some Massillon players before the start of the first game.
That's such weak tea, you know? Like, did he have any proof of it? This guy's a known liar.
So it actually does get a little sketchy here.
Okay.
So according to Stewart, Massillon players Tiny Maxwell and Bob Schuring had been solicited to throw the first game by Walter East, a baseball player turned end, who claimed to be backed by $50,000.
Wow.
That's a lot
That
of
is,
money.
yeah, that's a lot of money now.
So Maxwell and Schuring then reported the offer to Tigers coach Sherburne Whiteman, and the scandal ended before it began. East was then released by the Tigers. Only then was Wallace named by Stewart being East's accomplice.
Wow, so there almost was a bribe that went through.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to talk about the Walter East and Sherburne Whiteman layer of the story.
Oh my gosh, this just goes deeper.
Yeah,
Peeling an onion here.
I told you, it's the first conspiracy. Like,
Wow.
we gotta go big.
No, you're right.
So when East returned to Akron, he accused Tigers coach Sherburne Whiteman of masterminding the scandal. According to East, Whiteman had first asked him to solicit Maxwell and Schuring and have them throw the game. He then had East find a backer who would pay Whiteman $4,000. However, Whiteman backed out of the deal last minute. He later went on to add that no member of the Bulldogs or their backers, as far as he knew, were connected to the deal. He finally stated that the only reason that Stewart went public on the scandal was to ruin the attendance for the Canton-Latrobe game.
It all goes back to this Canton-Latrobe game. This is crazy.
Yeah. So East then gave the Akron Beacon Journal a copy of a contract in which Whiteman agreed to have the first Canton Massillon game thrown for $4,000. The contract was signed by East, Whiteman, and John T. Windsor, one of the owners of East Akron's baseball team.
No way.
Windsor admitted to his part in the scheme, backing up East's story. He said that he never even met Wallace.
So how'd Whiteman respond?
In an interview with the Plain Dealer, Whiteman stated that the contract signed by himself, East, and Windsor was done in accordance with instruction from Ed Stewart and the backers of the Massillon team. He stated that he reported East's scheme to Stewart and was told to go along with the deal to see which Massillon players would agree to throw the game and then remove them from the team. He then stated that he kept up the act until he had signatures of East and Windsor down on paper. Only then was East released from the team. Stewart defended the coach, agreeing that Whiteman had entered into the contract with East and Windsor at the behest of Tigers backers in order to get the goods on the fixers.
That's fucking wild.
Yeah, so there was like a scheme set up within the team to see if anyone was going to fix a game.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But guess what? There's another
No.
layer.
Oh my god.
We gotta talk about Blondie Wallace. Okay? Before we start, I want to show you a picture though.
Of Blondie Wallace?
Not just of Blondie Wallace, it is of the 1906 Canton Bulldogs.
Oh, no way. I'd love to see these boys. Oh, wow. This is really just like... Imagine a frat that only has freshmen in it, and all of them are being tricked by older people that this is like the cool frat, you know? That's the sort of folk who are on this team.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, they're all schlubs.
The picture isn't great, it being a 1906 picture in a 1906 newspaper now on my phone.
No, but, like, imagine seeing a picture of any of these guys and being like, this guy's on your NFL team. That would inspire no confidence in me.
No.
Not a single one of those. Schmoes, each and every one.
All right, so the scandal caused Wallace to file a libel lawsuit against Stewart and the Massillon Independent for $25,000, with Wallace claiming that his good name and professional credit had been ruined due to the paper story. However, this libel suit never came to a trial, and it is believed that he may have settled the case out of court. By this time, Wallace was too deep in debt to turn down any reasonable cash offer. Unimportant, he later became a bootlegger in Atlantic City and was, for a time, under federal indictment.
Like a bootlegger during, like, years later during Prohibition?
Like a bootlegger during Prohibition in Atlantic City.
Oh, I respect him for that, you know?
As for the scandal, the lack of a trial left the details of the events still disputed by historians and football fans alike. Because Wallace probably settled out of court, there is no real conclusion to the fixing scandal, just charges and countercharges. According to Henry March's book, Wallace has been seen as responsible for the scandal for the last 70 years.
But that's totally up in the air.
Yes, this book is very inaccurate.
So this book can't be trusted.
Not at all.
We have no documentation. This is never going to be solved.
No. What I can understand based on everything we've talked about is the theory of game fixing was a legitimate theory because a contract was signed stating that there would be game fixing.
Seems like it to me.
Except this whole thing was just a ploy by the team to see who was loyal and who wasn't. Like, it wasn't an actual plot to fix any game.
But that also seems like such a easy excuse when push comes to shove and you get caught for your game fixing practices, right?
You could say whatever you want, and if people believe you, you could just roll with it.
But I guess it's also like an insane excuse.
Yeah. On Thanksgiving, the Bulldogs defeated Latrobe 16-0 in front of the smallest crowd in years, 1,000 fans.
How big was their stadium, do you know?
I don't know how big their stadium was, but they're getting like the average Oakland A's attendance, which very good.
Yeah, I mean, for back then though, that's pretty great.
Canton blamed the scandal for the small crowd. However, some believe that once the Bulldogs lost to Massillon for the championship, nobody really cared about the game because they weren't going to see the championship team. So Canton players were not paid as a result. To help pay for the Latrobe's team's expenses, an effort was established in Latrobe which raised part of the team's $300 expense debt, and the balance of the money was borrowed by the YMCA so that it could be paid. Meanwhile, the Tigers traveled to Chicago to beat the all-Western team. The attendance for that game was a mere 2,000 supporters.
Wow.
The timing of the betting scandal being made public damaged Canton far more than Massillon. Many allegations stated that Canton threw the second game of the series. However, if the story had broken after Massillon's earlier loss to Canton, the Tigers would have been more damaged.
For sure.
Yeah. However, the scandal engulfed both teams and forced them to fold. Although Massillon could not prove that Canton had indeed thrown the game, it so tarnished Canton's name that virtually no one attended that Latrobe game on Thanksgiving. The Bulldogs, including Wallace, were now broke. A story by the Pittsburgh Post estimated that the team still owed its players $6,000 for the 1906 season. A benefit game between Massillon and Canton to help pay the Bulldogs players only drew 500 fans and resulted in a 5-5 tie. The proceeds from the game were only enough to get the remaining Canton players a train ticket home.
Wow, that's so sad. What a depressing ending to this story.
Well, it gets even more depressing.
Oh, don't tell me that.
The Tigers were also officially broke. However, the team still had enough money to pay its players. The Massillon area fielded a team of locals in 1907. The All Massillons, under Sherburne Whiteman, went on to win the 1907 Ohio League Championship. Whiteman and Stewart were still held with high regard in Massillon.
That's the 4th year in a row?
Yes.
Wow.
4 years in a row. And the coach and the manager who basically set up the entire scheme were held in high regard, and that was that. But I want to talk because it's kind of crazy how much a misinformation campaign can cause like such headaches across an entire sporting league. How many times were both these teams going back and forth in the press, making just like the most outlandish claims at each other?
Yeah, that's like the bulk of this story. And it's literally just like defamation after defamation after defamation. Neither have any standing, and they're just like, they're lobbing throws at each other because there's nothing they could do. Like, that's the only tactic they have, because they're being lied about, and what people read in the newspaper in the 1906, like, that's kind of
all they have. Yeah. Whatever they read is kind of fact.
That's the source of information they have.
Yeah. So basically, with God tier level hating, a newspaper at your disposal, and a massive misinformation campaign, you can destroy a football team that was only 3 years old.
All right, I'm going to write down those steps. Cowboys, you guys got it coming.
Well, the Cowboys aren't 3 years old anymore. We have to wait for an expansion team, and then we'll fuck them
You guys
up.
have it fucking coming. Yeah, we'll watch your backs. Football conspiracy is on you. The story I'm about to tell you has pretty much nothing to do with the actual game of football. What it is, though, is one of my favorite stories involving NFL players that I have ever come across.
Even better than our hungover hero, Max McGee?
It's completely different. You know, that one actually has to do with the game of football. This is one of the best that has nothing to do with that at all.
Okay, I'm guessing it's sort of football adjacent then.
It involves football player. It's football adjacent, for sure.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with the sport itself, but you'll see. So every time I think about this story, I can't decide whether I think it's an endearing story, like this is cute and wholesome, or it's super sad story, or it's a little bit of both, but I'm hoping you will be able to help me decide that today. So do you happen to know about People's Magazine's Sexiest Athlete Alive?
Yeah, didn't Jason Kelce win it recently?
Yes, you're actually completely right. This past year, Jason Kelce did win Sexiest Athlete Alive. The other finalists, if you're wondering, were Lewis Hamilton, Shohei Ohtani, and Joe Burrow. He's a type. I'm going to give it to Jason. Like, he's endearing. People like him.
Yeah, I can see, especially the dad bod was in 2023.
That's what I'm saying. He had a year, you know? Like, people loved him.
Yeah.
His podcast was doing big numbers.
His family was getting huge on TikTok, and his brother started dating a super famous person. I can't quite remember what her name is.
No. But we know about this. It's one of those yearly superlatives that comes up. It's kind of like Times Magazine's Person of the Year, but even more important. However, all of this about this past year, this is all inconsequential to today's tale. Today, we will be speaking about 1998's Sexiest Athlete Alive. In a story written by AJ Delario, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, for the publication Deadspin, Delario describes the process of deciding the sexiest athlete alive in 1998 when he was working for Sports Illustrated, which is affiliated with People's Magazine. Apparently, in previous years, People's Magazine writers asked Delario and his friends at Sports Illustrated for recommendations on who to elect for this highly esteemed position. The people at People's Magazine, they are not big sports people, you know? Like, that's not their thing. They're reporters. They're not paying attention to the sporting world. So they go over to
the actual people who know the sport.
Exactly, their colleagues. Who's the sexiest guy, you know? Like, let us know. For the record, I'm pretty sure the sexiest athlete alive has only ever gone to male athletes. I believe it's exclusively for male athletes, for those wondering. So in 1998, instead of asking Delario and his buddies down at Sports Illustrated, they apparently decided not to seek help from them at all and just decide who the sexiest athlete would be among themselves.
Of course, why not? If you're given such a task, why not take advantage?
Exactly, you know, like it's fun and lighthearted. What could go wrong? For the 1998 Sexiest Athlete Alive, the magazine chose the quarterback for the Chiefs, Rich Gannon. Here's a picture of him now. He's a decent looking guy. Nothing special about him.
I guess in 1998, calling him the sexiest athlete would not have been outrageous of a claim.
That's exactly how I feel. Like, this is completely milquetoast and understandable. He looks like the most, like, average white guy, but, like, the icon of 1988. Or say 1998, you know?
He kind of looks like if Drew Brees was beautified.
Yeah. It's like if you face-tuned Drew Brees. That's actually a good point. So, this guy, Richard Gannon, he was 33. He was a couple seasons removed from his prime in the Raiders. By all accounts, he was pretty handsome and pretty likable. That's what his reputation was around the sporting world. But in a beautiful gaffe, the editors of People's Magazine failed to tell the photographer that Rich Gannon was the choice. And instead, they simply told him that the winner was the quarterback for the Chiefs. When the photographer went to the Chiefs facility for the shoot, he photographed another Chiefs quarterback, Elvis Grbac. I'm almost certainly mispronouncing that name, but that's what we're going with. Grbac. The article they eventually published ended with the line, "His personality makes him sexy." So I will now be showing you a picture of Elvis Grbac and his iconic photo in the 1998 People's Magazine.
Oh my god.
He is definitely not as attractive as our boy Rich Gannon, and the photo's just awkward. It's him sitting on it's sitting on a bench.
It's him in a locker room sitting on a bench, but he's like in jeans with his like knee bent up on the bench, and he's barefoot.
Yeah, the dogs are out. They're barking.
Yeah, no, it's an awkward photo. He just looks like an average guy. There's nothing special. He just looks like an average guy who plays football.
I could not have put it better myself. Either way, the photographer went over thinking this was the winner, the quarterback for the Chiefs, Elvis Grbac. So when the editors in New York saw the photos, they were incredibly confused, obviously, but they're also incredibly embarrassed. It felt too far along at this point, and it seems like no one at the magazine had the heart to tell Elvis Grbac the truth. So that's how Grbac became 1998's sexiest athlete alive.
But did Rich ever get a spot? Did they mention him at least?
Rich Gannon would never grace the cover of People's Magazine. He will forever remain among the majority of athletes who never get named to this prestigious title.
Oh, that's... Poor Rich.
Poor Rich. Will never be able to flex
funny,
that
though.
on top of his NFL career.
That's really funny though. That they just lost in translation.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It shows what happens when you get people who don't know how to do a job they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from the beginning, it was almost bred for disaster. It's like, we're going to start off by asking a guy in his team, but the guy in his team just turns out to be one guy who makes the decision on his own. And when he tells the guy, and they go and tell the photographer, they say, "Oh, the Chiefs quarterback." Like, it's so many miscommunications. It was bred for disaster.
It's seriously just a comedy of errors. Like, it's one of my favorite stories out of the NFL for a reason. And you know what? Our boy Grbac
is sexiest athlete of the year in 1998.
He can never have that taken away from him.
No.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode.
You can find us on Twitter at FB Conspiracies, where we will post all the graphics and links we spoke about during this episode.
You can also reach us by email using fbconspiracies@gmail.com.
A special thanks to Blaze for the music.
If you enjoyed, consider leaving a review.
Join us next week for more football conspiracies. A large bar fight started in the hotel bar. Where else would it have started?